Hey y'all, this is Whitney and welcome back to an episode of Spastic Chatter. If you're new here, Spastic Chatter is a platform meant to feature those in the Cerebral Palsy community, and I get together with individuals with CP like myself to have an uncensored chat, if you will, about what it's like living with this type of disability. And for this week, I have Jonathan, and he is a very cool individual. He writes a column for forums, and he does a lot of other stuff too. So I'm excited for this conversation. But before we get into it, I'm gonna let Jonathan introduce himself. So take it away, Jonathan.
Thank you, Whitney. I really appreciate it, and I'm really glad to be here. People sort of ask me, what I do, and it's always sort of a loaded question. One of the ways that I sort of explain this is always what I do personally and professionally merge. And the reason for that is I was born with a right hemiparesis, a form of cerebral palsy, and that's influenced everything I've done in my life, everything. And when I was sort of growing up, I said, okay, what's the path I want to go down? And at that time, I thought academics would be the path I would go down, and to study disabilities in and around it. That was sort of the way I thought about it. And I did. I ended up going to school for, one would say, a very long time and have alphabet soup behind my name, and recognized when I was in graduate school that life sort of was taking me in a different route, and I liked the sort of applied stuff. And when I was at the University of Chicago, I was lucky enough to study under a guy by the name of Barack Obama. And he eventually ran for president. And I was lucky enough when he got the presidency that he was interested in doing disability policy. So friends of mine reached out, because I actually was doing my doctoral work at Columbia University at that point. And finishing up, and said, okay, so he's interested in thinking about disability policy. Would you want to join? And I said, absolutely, yes. And that sort of changed my life. I was in the White House from 2008 to 2011, but I was living in Los Angeles. So I was flying back and forth once a month and being on phone calls at 4 and 5 a.m. in the morning. But what I recognized at that point was I wanted to pivot and sort of focus on doing work both as a consultant. My doctoral work was in the anthropology of work, looking at the culture of business, specifically through a disability lens. So that was sort of the way that I would enter, and then using my clinical background, because I was trained as a therapist to do more executive coaching work and working on DEI issues, working on areas of psychological safety, but all was through a disability lens. So there was always this intersection. And what I found out is that my work is really at an intersection. It's at the intersection of business, disability, innovation, leadership, and culture, and how that works, whether it be through my writing, whether it be through consulting, whether it be through coaching. It gives me this platform to really work from, and this tapestry that I love.
That's very cool. And there's so much to unpack there, but I would just like to point out that, like, what you've done with your career and things like that, like it so mimics my like life plan that I had for myself. And like hearing about your story, it just like gets me like thinking about my own journey. Like I started off I have a bachelor's in rehab services, which if you're watching this podcast or you're listening to this podcast, probably know that's the vocational side of helping people with disabilities. And I wanted to, like you, I wanted to have all these letters behind my name, so I went back to grad school. I got a master's in special education, but during my time there, I kind of realized that I didn't want to per se do the teacher route. So my professors let me do kind of like a disability studies type type emphasis, and like I kind of, with all that being said, I kind of mimicked everything I do, like with a disability lens to everything, and like I've dabbled in wanting to go in the coaching realm with a disability lens, like a life coach. Like I've thought about doing a doctorate degree somehow. So like everything that you're mentioning, like it's just like I know it's cheesy to say, and I don't like when people say it, but like your journey is like inspires me to pursue my past and things like that. So I'm curious. There's just so much that we could discuss. Like, but I'm curious. How did you? Because how I know what I know of you is that you write for Forbes, and that's like pretty much the. I'm gonna be honest. That's pretty much like the only thing I knew about you before this call. So how did that take shape? Like,
well, Whitney, the way it took shape was they called me. They called me out of the blue, really, and they said, "Well, we're starting this through our leadership division that they write about, sort of business and leadership. We wanted to start a diversity and inclusion lane and a component for Forbes." And they said, "Would you write about the disability space through whatever way you want to explore it?" So they gave me carte blanche to write about anything and everything. And so I wanted to write a column. I wanted there to be a link and some continuity, rather than just writing article upon article. That really, it was a way. I think about it as my lab. It's like my laboratory. I get to think, I get to write, I get to explore. And as I say, I called it Mindset Matters because I really believe in a lot of ways when we look at disability issues, it's really a matter of mindset. It is about, so whether you're thinking about it through a design perspective, whether you're thinking about it through a policy perspective, whether you're thinking about it through the perspective of really traditional business, it's about that evolution of one's mindset and how one thinks about things, and then how one thinks and then eventually acts. So I was interested, again, in sort of looking at it from the perspective of that intersection of disability, business, innovation, leadership, and culture. And that's what I've been able to do. And I've been able to sort of explore my own thoughts, my own philosophies, and through the column. And the column has expanded like gangbusters. There are about 2.5 to 3 million readers. I am amazed that then from all over the world that people want to read as I say to my sister, I'm like, yeah, people want to read my drivel. But the fact of the matter is it's hit a nerve, and I'm so appreciative of it. And I love writing every week.
that's awesome. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you like you mentioned, you don't come from a journalism background, correct?
No.
Yeah, so that's what's very cool. Like you don't even like have like your degrees aren't in journalism and writing and things like that.
Well, I mean, I always wrote. I mean, writing has always been something that I've been very passionate about. But people call me a journalist now, and I'm like, well, I'm a social scientist, really. But I'll take. I'm an anthropologist, a psychotherapist. All of that's true. But journalist, yeah, I'll take that moniker as well.
That's awesome. I was thinking as you were talking, do you use like social media to like get like yourself out there? Because social media is like so big in today's like time. Like, do you think that that's like? Do you think that that's a good tool to use? Do you use social media to like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm very active. I was, more active on Twitter these days, and I'm active on Instagram. So sort of those three areas, and particularly LinkedIn because it's more business, it's sort of more professionally focused. But yeah, I'm very active. I post all my articles every week. I post thoughts and things. But yeah, I think that using that platform is fantastic. And there are all these naysayers about social media, but the fact of the matter is it's a tool, and it's really how one uses it. And you can make the argument both ways, but I find it very useful, and I have found it a way to connect to people within the disability community who share my opinions, who have gripes with it, but that's okay. I think that's what makes horse races, so to speak. Is that we have differences of opinions, we can find common ground.
Exactly. One of the like you mentioned LinkedIn, and I just started using LinkedIn like this year, like more like heavily to like get my podcast out there, and like that's how I've gotten like the business side of my stuff. Like I've had like people coming to me for opportunities instead of me chasing the opportunities. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I think that goes back to like what we're kind of goes back to what we're talking about, that it took like I started this podcast in 2020, and it took three years and almost and over 100 episodes later to like for me to finally get like a recognition and things like that. Like things don't just automatically pop off for people. Can you kind of like speak to that, like your journey like when you started, and then like go like being able to work with Obama and things
Yeah, I
like
mean,
that.
listen, I can tell you that my journey, it began. I can tell you, I turned 50 this year, and I came from in a world where disability studies didn't exist. I had to make it up. I mean, I was taking
And now
classes
it's a
left, right, and
degree.
center. Yeah, and I was sort of cherry picking all these things to say, well, how can this work? I was actually lucky enough when I was a professor at the City University of New York, and I was teaching at the Graduate Center, and I was teaching graduate students. It was MA and PhD programs that I helped develop their. It wasn't just me; it was a collaboration of many people, but helped design their disability studies program, and that's way over a decade ago. I was coming out of graduate school at that point, and so none of this existed in the way it exists now. And it's much easier to sort of say, oh, well, I want to go into disability studies. Well, it all existed. The only places it existed when I was going to school at that point was in the UK. And I did my undergraduate. I was lucky enough to do most of my undergraduate at Oxford University. So I was living in the UK. And that sort of changed my perception of disabilities to be outside the United States, to see it not only from the sort of, what was fascinating is sort of, okay, if you're here in the United States and you know people like John Kemp or Judy Heumann and others who are part of the disability civil rights movement, and how much that was part of the culture of looking at disability in the United States. When you go outside, it's a very different vantage point and sort of how one perceives culture. So there's a saying that anthropologists have is, we are the professional strangers. And I have always felt in the work that I do, I am the professional stranger, whether I'm doing consulting work, whether I'm doing coaching work. I get to see it from a different vantage point, and I take the opportunity to do that, to understand is saying, okay, I know my expertise, but it's about understanding other people's expertise and being able to say, how do we find the best solution? And going back to the original question, it's been a circuitous route to all of this. It's never been easy. It's never been simple, but it's been so rewarding on so many levels that I'm quite glad that I love the field I'm in, and I love the passion that I have for it, because this is the work of my life.
Awesome. I keep you as you're talking, like my wheels keep turning. What do you, like you said, that disability studies like didn't particularly exist like even a couple years ago. What what uh what kind of change do you think occurred to make disability studies like a primary like major in colleges, and like how disability is discussed today? It's not like in it's not like it's I feel like it's more discussed today than it was a couple years ago. And I kind of think maybe it's just because I became an adult and I started being more aware of these things. But like I feel like Obama put more of an emphasis on disability when he was in the White House, and that just kind of carried on throughout his terms and like where it is today.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I think look, there's the politics, there's obviously policy and who's at the top, but I also think the sort of social milieu has changed. I think academics have been pushing it. There's this sort of intersectionality of it. And then there's the policy end of it. You know, obviously there's the American with Disabilities Act, and there are 90 countries literally who've adopted laws based on the ADA. You know, very similar. And then there's the Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So you have the legal framework, but then there's the interest of, wait a minute, there is 1.8 billion people with disabilities on this planet. It's larger than the size of China. So you're talking about the largest minority group on the, well, I actually don't even like the word minority. I think it's the largest community on earth. And the fact of the matter is it's the only community anyone can join at any time. And so it runs across race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic, sexual orientation, so on and so forth. There is disability is the essence of diversity. So we need to actually think about it. Then there's the notion of accessibility. And what does accessibility mean, not only to this community, but how it really transforms the notion of human variability and the idea that this benefits everyone. It's part of disability is part of the human story. So we need to amplify that. We need to amplify it, whether it's in our policies, whether it's within sort of traditional academic studies, to arts and culture. It really runs the gamut.
Exactly. And I got to thinking like when I was growing up in like my undergrad and like teen in my 20 I was always told to use person first language. I'm a person first, and then my disability is second. But now I feel like there's this whole movement that started like disabled and proud. Like, no, I disability is not a bad word. Like I am disabled and I am proud. And like, so that kind of like twisted my whole mindset. And I think that largely that has to do with like the times and how you're talking about how everything like kind of shifted, like, and like social media's an aspect that's helped change that with like hashtags and things like that. I don't know if you want to touch on that disabled identity or.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about it a lot. I mean, part of it is, as being a social scientist, you look at identity all the time. I've been looking at it for over 25 years. Aside from my own as a person with a disability, and sort of seeing, okay, one of the beauties of social media is that amplification, that idea of representation, and being able to, so it really is important to think about it from that vantage point, and to say we can use these tools and amplify our own experiences, and the disability experience is a tapestry of experiences, and being able to understand, well, what does this narrative look like? And we're exploring it in different ways through different lenses. It's actually through a multitude of lenses, and recognizing that. And language itself is constantly evolving as we look at these sort of ideas of social identity and how they're being changed and valued in a different way. And then it's also access to economic capital, which is changing, because that change, as business changes, the idea of entrepreneurship of persons with disabilities is growing exponentially now, through various accelerators, through venture capital and private equity firms really getting interested, but also the culture is changing, where ESG, or investing, or impact investing, is becoming more prominent. So people are interested in particular groups that the social value is connected not only to a company's growth, but as opposed to just shareholder value, that there is a social impact involved. And this is where disability can play an enormous role in that. So I think there's growth in a variety of areas.
I totally agree. And I feel like with your episode in this conversation, we're just like scratching the surface with all these issues. Like, I feel like we could talk about these issues for at least a couple hours. And I like to, and like I told you before this, I like to count my episodes at like 30 minutes, because I guess a person with CP, I get winded, and I don't like to talk for very long. So is there anything that is there any topic that we haven't discussed that you really feel a need to talk about?
No, I think what's fascinating for me is that the disability journey is different for everyone. When you meet a person with a disability, you meet a person with a disability. You and I both have CP. We experience it in very different ways.
Yeah.
And it's important to understand that there is that individuality, but there is this connection. And it's building that connection as a community and recognizing people's differences and similarities. And what'll be fascinating from my vantage point, and my goal, I think, and where I want to focus on, is building what I call the disability economy, which is the idea of being able to helping to build companies, helping young entrepreneurs fulfill their dreams, and being able to create an ecosystem that benefits all.
Yep, that's very cool. And I like that you pointed out that we both have CP, but it presents differently, and like my experiences are different than yours, and like vice versa. And this is the main reason that I started Spastic Chatter is because I'm sharing other people's perspectives, and I'm shining a light that cerebral palsy and disability itself has a vast array of different like factors and things like that. Jonathan, at the end of all of my interviews, I ask my guests if they have any advice for those that may be watching. So do you have any advice for those that are watching? Like, it can be just a general advice, or like, we talked about so much, so it's hard to pinpoint like what kind of advice you want to give. But do you have any your go-to advice for people?
Yeah, I think for me this year, the mantra this year is balance. finding balance in your life. We've gone through the last several years dealing with the COVID pandemic. Our lives have been in utter upheaval, and being able to reset our lives is really important. To figure out what that balance looks like, and it's different for everyone, so that one can maintain a sense of equilibrium and find happiness and joy and a level of complacency. So that's the sort of word that I want to sort of provide everyone when you ask me the question, what advice? Find balance in your life.
I love that. And thank you, Jonathan, for being a guest on Spastic Chatter. I really enjoyed talking with you. And if you're watching this or listening and you want to be a guest on Spastic Chatter, feel free to reach out to me wherever with whatever platform you are listening or watching on, and check back for another episode of Spastic Chatter. Thanks. Bye.